Today we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Recall in another video I talked about the standard form of quadratics or of a quadratic. It is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This is important because you need to have it in the standard form before you can identify your a, b, and c to place in the quadratic formula. My 9-year-old son would like to give you some advice on how to memorize the quadratic formula. Take it away.
X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Awesome. Good job. Appreciate your help with that. Okay, so let's go and get into the first example. And again, you will notice this example does not have the equation written in standard form. So let's rearrange our terms to put it in an ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form. Do not drop off your equals 0. So the first thing I would need to do is for me, I actually would like to keep all of my positive, like my positive leading coefficient. Whatever side that is on the equal sign, that's the side I'm going to move all of my information to. The 7m squared is my leading coefficient. I know that because it has the largest exponent, which is 2. The next thing I want to write is the one that goes under that, so I'm counting down with my exponents. So if I subtract 12m on one side, I have to do the exact same thing on the other, so that's what I'm going to do here. And then I have a positive 12, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. I just wanted you to see what was happening. And I have a positive 12. I do not change the sign because it's already on the correct side of the equation. Now, I do put a 0 on the side that I took the 12m from because, again, I am trying to solve. When I'm solving, my answer will be in the form of variable equals some type of number. So this is what your answer form will look like. That's what you're looking for. It will no longer be in a factored form. This is a factored form. Okay, so pay attention to the directions. And solve and find, sometimes the directions will use those interchangeably. So now let's go ahead and identify our A, B, and C. So that's what I would want to do. A, B, and C. When I'm doing that, I also want to take into account the sign that's in front of the coefficient or constant. That is part of my A, B, and C. So if you just need to see it the other way that I taught before, A is 7, B is negative 12, and C is positive 12. Now we want to use that formula that my son was just singing to you. Negative. Now this is where a lot of students mess up. Negative, this first negative is part of your formula. So B also has a negative. You have to keep that negative inside of the parentheses with your B term, okay, or your B coefficient. I also want to make sure that you make it a good practice to put all of the numbers that you're substituting in. For the first time when you're entering it in the quadratic formula, you definitely want to use parentheses. So 4 times A, which is 7, times C, which is 12. All of that in parentheses, and then all over 2 times A. So if you're paying attention to patterns, you will notice that the B's are the first 2, so they both have to have the negative 12. A times C is something I taught you with factoring, so you can remember that, 7 times 12, and then you have another A. So A should be the same in both places, B should be the same in both places, and C is the only one that is there one time. Now you want to start simplifying. Let me make some room here. Once I start simplifying, I am going to end up with a positive 12 because a negative times a negative will make this a positive. Positive 12. And I'm doing plus or minus because these are 2 different equations, but I'm doing them all at the same time until I get to the end. So negative 12 times negative 12, that's what negative 12 squared means, is 144. In your calculator, do not forget the parentheses or you will not get a positive 144. You will get a negative 144, which will be incorrect. Pay attention to your parentheses. All of this is divided by 2 times 7, which is 14. And then I'm going to go on to the next page to continue simplifying. And I end up with 12 plus or minus. And inside of my radical, I have 144 minus 336, which is a negative 192. And I divide this by the 14. We're going to go back to what we learned about simplifying radicals. If you have a negative sign, you automatically have an I that will come out. And then for your 192, I know that 1 plus 9 is 10, 10 plus 2 is 12. That means if 12 is divisible by 3, so is 192. So I am going to take the square root of 3, and now 192 divided by 3 will give me my other factor, which is 64. I am putting it under a square root because the 192 is under a square root. Now I want to further simplify. If I do so, I end up with 12 plus or minus, and my square root of 64 is really 8. I can bring out the I. I can do nothing with the square root of 3 because I do not have two factors that can multiply times themselves to give me a 3. So I have to leave it in that radical. Now I can simplify. All three numbers are divisible by 2. So 12 is divisible by 2, 8 is divisible by 2, and 14 is divisible by 2. So I want to put it in the form of a plus bi, which is the real part plus the imaginary part, so that's what I'm going to do. 12 divided by 2 is 6 plus or minus. 8 divided by 2 is 4i. And then, let's see, I can't do anything with the radical 3, so I'm going to go ahead and keep that under the radical. And I didn't separate it, but I will. I forgot to do that. Matter of fact, let me just get rid of this. You will sometimes see it all over one big fraction because it is one big fraction. And I'm going to make this clearer for you as well. Plus or minus. And then finally, 14 divided by 2 is 7. So this really is my answer. 6 over 7 plus or minus 4i radical 3 all over 7. This is composed of two, oops, I thought I was doing another color. That's okay. Yeah, this is composed of two different answers. You have a 6 over 7 plus 4i radical 3 over 7, and you have a 6 over 7 minus 4i radical 3 over 7. It's just easier to put the plus or minus together instead of writing it 2 times. Also pay attention to the fact that the I is in front of the radical. If you choose to do it after, you have to make sure it's in the numerator, but it's not under the radical. Or you can put a parenthesis around the second fraction and put the I on the outside of it. Keep that in mind. Do not make it look like 7i. Okay, let's move on to example 2. So example 2, same thing. I need to rewrite it first in standard form. So I am going to, my 12 n squared is positive, so I want to move everything over to that side, which means I'm moving the negative 12 over, which will change the sign to a positive 12. I have an equal sign. I do not drop it, and I leave the equal 0. That tells me that my answer form is going to be x equals something. So let's go back and make sure that okay, here we go. I didn't bring that down, but just make it a habit of writing that x is equal to. Okay? That's what you just solved for. Do not put, if you write it in 2 different answer forms, do not put a parenthesis around it because that represents x, y. We're just looking for x. So we want our answer to be x equals a number. All right. You learned when we were factoring, you could factor out the greatest common factor. So let's do that. We can divide out a 3. So 3 is our greatest common factor, which leaves us with 4n squared plus n plus 4 equals 0. So now I can identify my a, my b, in my C. And again, I want to keep up with my signs. X equals negative b, in this case is 1, even though you don't see it, plus or minus square root 1 squared minus 4 times a is 4, c is 4. And everything just happens to be positive. That's why there's a positive here, but the negative comes from the actual formula. 2 times a, and this time a is simply 4 because you took out the greatest common factor. Okay. Now when I simplify, I end up with x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus square root 1. Negative 4 times 4 is negative 16. Negative 16 times 4 is negative 64. All over 2 times 4. X is now simplified again to 1 plus or minus square root of 1 minus 64 is negative 63, all over 8. So again, I will begin to simplify what's under my radical. I automatically see an I because I see a negative sign. I know that factors of 63 could include 9 and 7. I put them both under a radical because that helps me to see if I have a perfect square in one of the factors, and I do. So 9 square root of 9 is actually 3. When I continue simplifying, I have x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus, this time I go over to my factors, 3i, because they are no longer under the radical. Square root of 7 stays under because I don't have two factors that multiply times themselves to give you that 7. My answer is as one big fraction, but I want to put it in the a plus bi form. And so therefore that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rewrite the first fraction as negative 1 over 8 plus or minus, and then I take the next part, 3i radical 7 all over 8. This is my answer. X equals negative 1 over 8 plus or minus 3i square root of 7 over 8. That is how you solve using the quadratic formula. So now let's talk about the discriminant. The discriminant is basically, it is just the part that's under the radical of your quadratic formula. So b squared minus 4ac should look familiar because we just talked about that. And if you look at your rules for your discriminant, if you have a positive number in your answer, which is greater than 0, two distinct real solutions will be the number and type. Sometimes they'll ask that question, what's the number and the type? So that's what you would tell them. And then you will also have a case where it equals exactly 0. That's when you have one distinct real solution. And you may have a case where you have a negative number, which is where it's represented by less than 0. So your number will be 2 and your type will be imaginary solutions or non-real. And finally, we have our last example, which is, again, not written in standard form. So let's do that first. We want to take the 7 from the right-hand side of the equal sign and move it over. So negative 3x squared minus 3x, negative 3 equals 0. You may say, well, why didn't you move the negative 3x squared over to the right? You could, but make sure you move the negative 3x over as well. So it's up to you. Because we're doing a discriminant, it will still work itself out. Now I want to identify A, B, and C, and I will notice each one has a negative sign. So now I want to go ahead and use my discriminant formula, which is b squared, negative 3 squared, minus 4 times A, which is negative 3, times C, which is also negative 3. I put the substitutions in parentheses because if I put this in the calculator as simple negative 3 squared, I am not going to get the same answer. It's going to be incorrect, so please pay attention to that. 9, and then negative 4 times negative 3 is positive 12. Positive 12 times negative 3 is negative 36. I can clearly see that I am going to have a negative answer because negative 36 absolute value is bigger than positive 9. So 9 minus 36 leaves me with negative 27. So if I am asked, what's my discriminant? This is my discriminant. If I am asked, well, what is the number and the type? Then I would say I have 2 imaginary solutions, or non-real. So it depends on your the wording in your test. It may say non-real, it may say complex. Just know it all means imaginary. Have a great day, you guys.